All right, everybody. Hello and welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, both in person and live on our Twitch stream. I really can't say enough how excited we are to host our guest today. Just a brief background here. She received her PhD, that's right, PhD in psychology in Paris, and eventually found her way at Ubisoft, working with playtesting, and then following that, served as UX lead at LucasArts. And then, of course, most pertinent to today's talk, she was the director of UX at Epic and is going to reveal all the psychology and strategy behind that UX and why it is so successful as it is today. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Celia Hodent.
Thank you, Adam. All right, can you hear me okay? On the stream also? Okay, awesome. So I'm very excited to be here today with you. I love to talk about psychology in video games. It's pretty cool. So if you have any questions later on and you didn't have the time to stand or to stay here and ask me questions, I'm pretty active on Twitter, so you can hit me up on Twitter and ask me questions later. All right, so like Adam said, I've been around for the past 10 years in the video game industry. I started at Ubisoft in France and then moved to Ubisoft Montreal, then LucasArts and Epic. And I worked very closely at Epic on Fortnite team more specifically. But I worked on the studio level, so I worked also on other projects like Unreal Engine 4, etc. So let's start this. Why do we need UX? This UX thing is kind of new in the game industry. Before that, we just do what we want to do, ship it, and if it works, that's fine. If it doesn't work, well, too bad. I think that game came out. It was on iOS. Came out probably in 2012, and was the first time that I had a real hint that UX became a thing in the game industry. That's a real achievement that I unlocked in a real game, Kung Fu Rabbit. It's not photoshopped. And so that was really funny because instead of saying, well, too bad for you, you died, it was more about to say, well, you bought our game. It was a platforming game, and it seems that you like platforming games on iOS, yet you died a lot in that level, and it was fairly early in the game. So either I suck, or maybe things can be changed, so the game that I like to play can be improved, so I don't feel so much frustrated. So that's the idea of UX, is to, instead of just thinking about what we want to do as creators, is to take a step back and place ourselves in our audience shoes and ensuring that they're going to have the experience that we intended for them and not too much frustration or frustration where it's not supposed to be. You lost one screen's back. Cool. Etc. So to do that, there's three things that I'm going to talk to you about today. It's an overview, of course, just like 45 minutes to talk about all that. We're going to start with cognitive science because to understand a little bit why UX is so important, you need to understand a little bit how the brain works. Because the experience of your players is going to happen in their minds. When you experience something, it's in your mind, especially a game. So we need to understand a little bit how the brain works and how it learns so that you can anticipate problems that issues and frustrations that you did not plan. So we're going to start with that. Then very briefly, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the framework I've been using on Fortnite that I've been developing in the past 10 years. That is kind of ingredients that you can use to guide you. And the last point is going to be the scientific method. How can we be sure that we're on the right track? And it's by adopting a scientific method because we humans are biased. So that's the reason why we need science. So that's overall the three things I'm going to cover, and then I'll answer questions. All right, so let's do this. At an overview level, this is what's going on in your brain when you learn. It's super simplified. But whenever you learn about something, you process information from the environment, it always starts with perception. It starts with an input. You don't learn from the void. So you learn from all the information that's conveyed through your senses. By the way, we don't only have 5 senses. That's a myth. We have way more than 5. We don't exactly know how many, but we have more than 20. For example, you can sense temperature, or you can sense your body in space. So you can close your eyes and you can touch your nose without looking at your hand. That's called proprioception. That's another sense. So we have a lot of senses. And so all the information coming from our environment is going to be conveyed through our senses. And that part is called perception. And then if you learn about what's going on about the environment, if you learn about something, it means that you memorized a new information. When you memorize what's happening, it's changing something physically in your brain. It's creating new synaptic connections. So synapses are connections between neurons, or strengthening older connections. So when people are freaking out about video games that it's rewiring kids' brains, they are correct. It is rewiring your brain, but anything you do in life is rewiring your brain. Playing a game, watching a movie, reading a book, listening to me right now is rewiring your brain. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's perfectly normal. This is what we call plasticity. The brain has plasticity. Thanks to that, we can adjust to our environment and survive. So it's a pretty important thing to have. And of course, there's a lot of things happening during the process. There's a lot of factors that are going to make the learning more or less efficient. You have biological factors, physiological factors, many factors. We're going to mainly talk about attention. We know that if we don't pay attention to something, we're much less likely to remember it. So attention is really important in the process. So we're going to talk about, very briefly, each of these, and perception, memory, and attention. And I'm going to mention the main limitation that we have. Our brain has great capacities, but it's also greatly limited. And we need to understand how, so that you can anticipate problems in your games. And I'm going to give you an example of how we overcome these limitations in Fortnite. Please keep in mind that this is really, really overly simplified. The brain is not as simple as that. We don't have little tiny and super nice buckets like these that are nicely separated and independent from each other. So it's not working that way. And we don't have a serial process necessarily. It's not even a process. We use a lot of terms coming from a computer to describe how the brain works because it's convenient, because it's a metaphor that we can understand since we use computers that much. But the brain does not work like a computer. It's extremely complex. It's so complex that our brain is also too limited to understand itself. So we need the help of AI and machine learning to figure it out. So it's extremely complex. So please be careful every time people use neuroscience to make it look more serious what they're talking about. Be careful. There's a lot of neuro hype that leads to neuro bullshit. So be careful with that. All right, so let's start with perception. Can you tell me what you perceive in this image? Yeah, you can just shout it out.
Street Fighter characters.
All right, how many of you perceive Street Fighter characters in this image? Okay. Yeah, okay, that's usually what I get. So I do that a lot in game studios. And I roughly have 40%, 40% of my audience are game developers. So Street Fighter characters is super excited. Then the rest of the people are like, I don't know, maybe people. They're not sure. And sometimes I have very different answers like DNA and stuff like that. So yes, it is indeed a representation, artistic representation of Street Fighter characters. And it's just why am I using this? It's a very good illustration that even if you are all in the same city, studying the same stuff, excited about games, playing games, loving games, making games, you are all not going to perceive the same thing at the same time because perception is subjective. That's something that we forget all the time. A perception is not a passive window to the world. We don't perceive the reality as it is. We construct it. Perception is a construct of the mind. It's going to be impacted by your culture, what you care about, if you played or not Street Fighter and loved it. And it's also impacted by many, many things, context, expectations, etc. And if you're colorblind, like about 8% of the male population, you're excluded from this example right now. So it's a good reminder to never, ever use colors to convey information by itself. So you can use colors, but use shape or texture as well, because it's really important for accessibility. All right, so perception is subjective. That's a big problem when you make games, because game is just a series of inputs, of stimuli that are mostly visual and audio, and you need to make sure that the players, what they're going to perceive is what you intended. But because perception is subjective, even if you feel that you know your audience, you're not going to be sure 100% that they are going to perceive the thing that you intended. And that's a big issue, and that's the reason why we do playtests, to verify that people perceive the things the way you intended. Here's an example from Fortnite, from back to 2013. This is an icon from Fortnite back then. Can you tell me what you believe this icon represents in the game? What is that? Ammo? Trees? Trap? Yeah, okay. Spikes? Yeah. Danger. Okay. So back then, the game had already a good, the loop was there, so we could bring people over so they could try the game for maybe 20 minutes. And after they played, so they interacted with a bunch of stuff in Fortnite. And then I asked them questions through a questionnaire. What is this? What is that? This is indeed the icon for traps, like some of you said. So, of course, that was a placeholder menu back then. But you can see, so I'm going to put it here, like the spikes here, that was for the menu for the traps. So over here, it's farther away from me. But here you have it here. But I didn't get 100% of the people who came over to test the game telling me, oh yeah, that's the traps, even though they played the game a little bit. Many of them said ammunition, and it does look like the icon for ammunition. It's right above the spike one, the traps one. And others said trees or something to do with construction. So it's a problem because this is going to be in the main menu in Fortnite. It's about traps, which is pretty central in the game. And I don't want to have any confusion with traps. Fortnite is not a game where we challenge perception. You have games that challenge perception, like Monument Valley is a game that challenges perception. It's totally fine to play around and put the challenge there if this is the point of your game. This is not the point of Fortnite. So I want to make sure that people are not going to be confused by that. So we iterated on it, and we used a stereotype, an archetype of traps. We used a bear trap representation. There are no bear traps in Fortnite, but as soon as we changed it for this archetype, no one was confused anymore. So this is really important to think about. You're going to have to test a bunch of stuff. Here we talked about UI. UX is not just about UI. UX is about all the things. So you can test your environment, your character design, et cetera, et cetera. This is just an example with icons. But it's really important to not put frustrations and frictions where this is not the point of your game. All right, let's play another game. Do you all know the Thinker, the sculpture from Auguste Rodin? It's pretty well known. Try to picture it in your mind and try to remember what's the posture, on which leg or legs lay which arm or arms of the thinker. So what do you think? And usually I see people like subtly trying to reproduce the gesture. Right on right? Right leg right, like that? Right on left, okay. So how many of you think it's crossed, either right on left or left on right? How many of you think it's on the same side? Okay, any other answers? Right on left? Okay, so let's take a look. He has both arms on the left leg. I know it was a trick question. Okay, so what happens here? The memory is fallible. We don't take pictures of things and then we store them somewhere, and when we have to remember it, whoop, we bring it back to consciousness. This is not how the brain works. Perception is a construction. Memory is a reconstruction. So every time you memorize, you remember something, you reconstruct from your brain, from somewhere, we actually don't know where it's located, and you try to remember. So every time you're likely to lose information or to transform things. We're not accurately remembering things. Unless you're an artist and maybe you drew it, you made a picture of it, so maybe you paid attention way more, or you did the sculpture yourself. If you did that, then you have a deeper process of this input. It's not just shallow, like if you just saw it a few times, it's very shallow. But if you really, that's why we say learning by doing is much more efficient because it's a deeper process. So you're more likely to remember it more accurately. But most of the time, this is not what happens. And on top of that, there's a lot of stuff that we forget. So this is the forgetting curve that was made by Emil Gauss in the 19th century. He was a German psychologist. Back then, he tested himself. So today, we do that much better. It was replicated many times, so it's pretty solid. He taught himself syllables that did not have any meaning because he did not want to have any familiarity with the information. And then he learned them by chunks. And then he tried to remember them after he learned them by heart. And then he varied the moment when he had to recall. So let's say he learned about 10 words, like pseudo word, like syllables that don't mean anything. Just he repeats them again, until he knows them by heart. And then like, okay, I know them by heart, and then he writes them down again. When it's immediate recall, it has 100% good answers. He just learned them by heart. But after 9-10 minutes, drops down to 60% of good answers. And after a day, it's dropping down to nearly 30%, which means, and it's your worst case scenario, but if you try to learn about something that doesn't mean anything, that you don't necessarily care about with no methodology of any kind, you're going to lose about 70% of the content that you learn from one day to the next. That's a big deal in education. So hopefully tomorrow, you'll remember more than 30% of what we saw today, because hopefully it's meaningful to you, and I'm using things so that you process information and you remember it. But in games, it's also a big problem that we have. Not only people might not perceive the things the way we intended, but they might not remember it correctly. And that's a big deal, because most games, it's not just a one-off, 1 hour experience. You have to come back. And when you come back, if it's a day later, you forgot a bunch of stuff, then it's not good. So there's many ways to solve for that. But one of the things that we do to overcome the fact that memory is fallible is having HUDs. That's the reason why HUDs are so powerful, because this is where we just put information that players do not have to remember. It's always there. We don't ask them to remember that information. That's the reason why it's a fallacy to believe you need to remove all the HUD to be more immersive. That can work only if the game is super simple, when you don't have to remember a lot of stuff. If your game is a little bit complex, or like a bunch of stuff, or resources to manage, if you don't have a HUD, it means that you increase the memory load for the players. So HUDs are really useful for that. We give away information to players so they don't have to remember it. So all the stuff that's on screen, like how much of the different materials do I have, what are my weapons. Every time you get close to a searchable object, you see the key you need to press. You don't have to remember that. Another example, if you want to craft something in the game, like the exterminator, you don't have to remember anything. You don't have to remember the name of the thing you find cool. You don't have to remember what are the ingredients that you need to harvest. You don't have to remember how many of it, which is the one that you're missing. You can just spin it in the HUD, and so players can just focus on their objectives and not into memorizing things that we don't care. Again, Fortnite is not a game where we challenge players to memorize information. We have games that do challenge that. It's not the case in Fortnite. So it's always about thinking about where do you want to put a challenge and remove all the frustrations that are not by design. Okay, now I'm going to show you cards, and I'm going to ask you to choose one and to remember that card as accurately as you can. But it's going to go fast. So choose one card and remember that card. All right, I bet I can guess which card you picked and make it disappear. What? Are you impressed? No. Okay, so what happened here? Yeah. Yeah. I've changed all the cards. The reason why this kind of works, I'm not a magician, okay, so, but magicians do that much better than me, is because of a phenomenon called change blindness. It's very well known in psychology. You can Google it. You'll find a lot of very funny games to play. We are very bad at processing information, at paying attention to all the things that's happening around us. So if we're asked to just choose a card and remember that card, we're not going to process all the cards unless you think there's a trick or it depends on people. It's not 100% sure all the time. But magicians use that. It's called misdirection in magic. You misdirect attention. Like, look here, and we do something else over there. Magicians are very good at understanding our limitations in terms of perception, attention, memory, and manipulate it. They do that to make the magic happen. So same thing for you. You have to, the make-believe for your players is important. So you need to be like magicians, understand the limitation of the brains so that you can make the magic work. Okay, so attention is scarce. Now a lot of games challenge attention. Like action games are all about challenging attention. So it's all fine to challenge attention, but you have to be careful to not challenge it too much than what you thought, because you know where things are, you know what to do, so it's easier for you, of course. And also you have to be careful when players are learning about your game. When they are learning, like remember when I don't know if you learn to drive a car not so long ago, if you remember that process. As you learn how to drive a car, this is not when you want to be challenged on a race, okay? So same thing here. When players are learning about a game, even though they're hardcore gamers, they still have to learn about a lot of stuff. All that is draining their attentional resources. And so we only have scarce attentional resources. So this is not the moment when you can challenge players to multitask, because multitask is a myth. So here's an example in Fortnite of what not to do. We were testing very early on situations where we would teach players X, Y, and Z, more specifically for the PvE mode of the game, like Save the World. Here's an example, like in playtests, when we were testing how we would teach players to heal. So back then, to heal, you had to consume a health item, like this thing, here over there, like the health item. It's not the case. It's not true anymore in Fortnite. Now you use straps, but whatever. How do we convey that information? So usually you want to make sure that people care about it. So the trial was to wait until the first time players have their health bar going below 50%. So it looks like this. Players are getting hurt for the first time, and so their bar is going below 50, and so it's flashing, and then you have information, hey, you've been hurt, consume a health item to get better. And then it disappears. Well, here, of course, what happened is that the players that were in playtest were not able to see anything. Like, they were not able to even perceive that there was something flashing in the HUD. Because when we're concentrated into doing something like destroying zombies, this is not when we can process other information. So be careful with that. We can't multitask efficiently. So if your players are focused on something and you convey information at the moment, but they were not ready for it, they're probably not going to see it. If they see it, maybe they're going to see it, but they're not going to process it. And if they process it very shallowly, they're probably not going to remember it. So be careful with that. We have a tendency to forget about all these things. We are blind to our own blindness. We are blind to our own limitations. So try to remember, perception is subjective, attention is scarce, memory is fallible. It's because of that that we need to have some guidelines in UX to help us overcome these issues so that you can offer the experience you want to offer to players. And of course, you're going to play with some of these things. It's totally fine. But know where you want to put the frustration, where you want to put the challenge to players. All right. So now we're going to talk about game UX very briefly. The idea is to have some ingredients, guidelines to help us because developing games are pretty complicated. This can help you make sure that you're not forgetting anything, because memory is fallible. So we use a checklist. There's two big pillars to approach game UX. The first one is called usability. It's about the ability of the game to be used. So I'm sure you've heard of that. So it's really important. It's common to all products, so whether it's an object or a website or a game. And the other part is more fuzzy. It's like a game can be usable, but boring. So what makes a game fun? And this is fuzzy. We don't have a good term for that. So some people use the term fun. The problem I have with that term is we all find different things fun. So it's hard to really picture what is fun if we all have a different definition of it. I used to call that game flow for a long time, but it's not really covering everything. Some people call that immersion, etc. So at the end of the day, I was like, okay, it's about engagement. Are people engaged with your game or not? So this is why I have a makeup word here, engageability. Because I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to call it that way, because at least we understand what we're talking about. Because it's the ability of the game to be engaging. Okay, so usability. We're going to talk here about two main things. It's all about these stuff. So usability, heuristics, it's been around for a while. You'll find a lot of resources online, mostly coming from web design. But these are the ones that I broke down, and I changed a little bit the vocabulary to make it more usable for game developers. So for example, signs and feedback in the web design 10 heuristics usability, it's called visibility of system status. It's not really a term that we use, so I'll call that signs and feedback, because these are terms that we use, and it's to express the same thing. So the signs and feedback, all the things that you do to convey information to players, guide them, they have to be here, they have to be clear. Form follows function is what we talked about a little bit with the spike trap. What shape or sound, all the elements you're going to have so that they can convey the functionality to players. It needs to be consistent. You need to minimize your workload, just like we talked with the memory load and the HUD and all that. Error prevention and recovery. I don't have the time to talk about that. In some games, you don't necessarily want to punish all the errors that players can do. And flexibility. So flexibility is also very important for accessibility. So I'm just here going to talk about two things, form follows function and flexibility. So form follows function is what we call in design affordance. You want to make sure, like, if the challenge is about to go from one room to the next or to do something next door, it's not in understanding how the door functions. So if you have a door with a handle, it affords you to grab the handle and pull. But many doors have handles, but needs to be pushed, which is annoying. So that's a UX fail, and there's no form follows function in that case. We can't just by looking at the form understand the function. And in design, we call that affordance. Again, it's not just about the UI. We have a tendency to only talk about the UI when we talk about UX. Here's an example from Mario with character design. If you look at all these characters, just by looking at their form, you can anticipate how they can be dangerous to you and what they do. So, of course, like the first one on top left is tied to the ground. It's not going to run after you. Or this one is going to go, the bullet one is going to go super fast in one direction. It's unlikely it's going to turn around to chase you in the other direction. Of course, skeleton is going to be dangerous for you from afar because it's about to throw something at you. Bowser, of course, if you jump on it, you're probably going to get hurt because there are spikes. This is form follows function applied to character design. Same thing for a game where you want to convey to players what there's an upper floor. If there's a ladder or staircase, you understand there's an upper floor. Now, if you have a ladder and you cannot actually use it, that's annoying. That's a false affordance. Because if you have a ladder but it's just here to decorate, the player might think that there's something upstairs, but they can't use it. So we have to think about all that for everything that you do. Environment design, level design, character design, etc., etc. UI, of course. And flexibility is about making sure all the different things in your game can be flexible, especially the information you give to players. So can be the UI, can be what different features you want on and off. It's very important for accessibility. Accessibility is about making sure your game is going to be accessible to everyone, including players with disabilities. That's important. It's way more than you think. And we have a tendency to think about disabilities as something that's permanent, but you have temporary disabilities. Like if you break your arm, now all of a sudden you can't really easily play with two hands. Or if, I know that here it's not necessarily the case, but if you're on the bus and you're holding yourself, or in the metro, you can't play with two hands. Or if you have a baby, you're holding the baby, you can't play with two hands. So you have to think about accessibility as it's usually better UX for everyone. And also we have regulations around accessibility, and it's going to get more important in the next years. So you have to be ahead of the curve with that. You have to understand how to make your games more accessible. So remapping of controls, subtitles, make sure that it's big enough, that there's a background so you can clearly see, et cetera, et cetera. You can go see that website. It has a ton of great information, and you have a lot of stuff that's really easy to implement. So it's not like it's difficult things to do. And there's also in many engines, you have like in Unreal, I think in Unity you have that as well. You have the colorblind filters, so you can take a look in the engine, like how does it look like for people with different color blindness. Okay? Okay, so that's the easy part. We have a ton of information on usability. We can make that much better. That's going to make a huge difference for your game. I can't tell you how many games that could be super awesome. We can't get to the awesome part because of stupid problems with usability that could be solved pretty easily. But then, of course, if your game is usable, it's not making it engaging. So engageability is about three main things. It's about motivation, emotion, and game flow. There is no behavior without motivation. We don't do things unless we're motivated to do them. So it's really important to understand how human motivation works so that you can make sure you're engaging. Emotion is important, of course. Emotions are here to guide us, so that's going to have an impact on your games. I don't have the time to talk about emotion, but stuff like game feel. There's a good book called Game Feel, about game feel. It's about sense of presence, so that's the immersion, and giving surprises, etc. And game flow is about make sure that the game is not too easy, because otherwise it's boring, but not too hard, otherwise it's really stressful. And good pacing, not always all the way to 11, like pacing it out. And the learning curve, making sure that players can learn properly how to be competent in your game. And so motivation, I'm just going to talk about motivation. It's really important. You have different types of motivation. The two main that we usually talk about are extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is when you do something in order to get something else. So it's to get something else. I mean, let's say that you hate to drive, but you want to go to the movies, so you need to drive to go to the movies. So you have an extrinsic motivation to go to the movies. Maybe you're here because you have to be here. Otherwise, you're going to have, you need credits or whatever. Whatever it is, the reason, I hope it's not just that. But that's extrinsic motivation. You just do something to get something else. Intrinsic motivation is when you do the things for the pleasure of doing them. Maybe you love to drive. So you just take your car to just like go around and drive. Maybe you are interested into UX and the game and the brain and how it impacts video games. So you're here because you are intrinsically motivated to learn more about that. Both are really important for anything we do, and especially in games, of course. Extrinsic motivation, we do that pretty well in video games. You have a lot of missions that you have to do, and you're going to get rewarded. So maybe you don't care about killing 12 wolves, but you need, I don't know, the fangs or whatever it is to craft something. So there's many cases where we do a mission and we do something not necessarily because we care about that specific mission, but we need the reward to do something else, usually. So making sure that players have short-term, medium-term, long-term goals, and they have clear rewards associated to these goals, and they understand what's the meaning of these rewards, what should they care about these rewards, is really, really important. Intrinsic motivation is also very important. It's usually what people forget about when they talk about gamification. They think about badges and rewards, but intrinsic motivation is actually very powerful. It's so there's that theory called the self-determination theory, or SDT for short, is the best theory we have right now to understand intrinsic motivation. It states that we are more intrinsically motivated into doing activities when these activities satisfy our needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Competence is mainly about feeling that we're progressing. So it's really important in games. We use that a lot. But if you start to do an activity that you care about, let's say, oh, I want to learn to play the guitar or whatever. And so you start learning, and every day you feel that it feels like you're getting better at it. It's motivating. If you feel like you're not getting better at it, this is when a lot of people are going to stop and not persevere. So this is really important to feel competent, to feel that you're progressing. Yes, it's hard, but every day I'm progressing. It can be skill-based, like the case of the guitar, or a game when you need Twitch skills. You play and play and play, and at some point you know everything. Like Fortnite, at some point, like players, like they do forts super fast. So that's skill-based. But a lot of games, you still have a sense of progression, even though it's not necessarily skill-based. Like think about RPGs. You level up. Every time you level up, you're going to get a new ability that's going to make you more powerful artificially within the world. So that's not skill-based. Still, you're progressing. And that's the reason why progression bars are powerful. It's not just because you know that when you're going to level up, you're going to get a new reward. So that's extrinsic motivation. It's also powerful because we see that we're progressing. And that's why you see progression bars everywhere in your Fitbits or whatever you're using. Autonomy is mainly about self-expression. We love to feel different from one another. And so all the games where you can express yourself is really important. So it could be by choosing your avatar, by choosing your dance moves in Fortnite, by customizing any way you want. But it's not just that. It can be also about how you decide to solve problems. That's the reason why sandbox games are pretty compelling, because you can do whatever you want. You feel very autonomous. Like a game like Minecraft is super high on autonomy. So it's really important to make sure that people don't feel controlled, that they can express themselves and have meaningful choices. It has to be meaningful, not, do you want to save the world, yes or no? It's like, no. It has to be a meaningful choice. And relatedness, we are a very social species. We survived thanks to our cooperation. Otherwise, we would not be here today to talk about the brain. So relating to one another is really important. We have a tendency in games to focus on competition. Cooperation is actually much more powerful than competition. We needed to cooperate to survive. It's not just about competing. So in many games, even when you have competition, you very often have cooperation. It's a team-based game. It's a team cooperating to compete against another team. So anytime you have a game when you have relatedness with real humans, you can try to recreate that with NPCs. It's much harder, of course, but it's doable when you really have a feeling that you can help an NPC, that NPC is important to you, like think maybe Mass Effect 2, or maybe even like Portal, the cube in Portal 2. You have that connection with that cube. But of course, with non-humans, it's way more complicated. That's why people hate robots, like bots, like a chat box and stuff like that. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's really important in your game. You don't necessarily have to cover everything, but you need to think what's going to be really meaningful for your game. So sure, you're like, oh shit, I don't have a lot of self-expression in my game. Let's add character customization. Sure, but if you make the players spend 10 minutes at the beginning of a new game to choose carefully their skin tone, their hair, their size of their eyes, how they're distant from one another, etc. And then your game is in first-person camera, looking at you, Skyrim. It's not as meaningful as if your game is in third-person camera. And it's even more powerful if your game not only is in third-person camera, but multiplayer. Because not only you look cool, you know that other people you can show off how cool you are. Like think about Fortnite. It's a third-person camera game, and you can look at yourself, see yourself looking cool, and others are seeing you looking cool. Think about Overwatch. Overwatch, you have emotes. Overwatch is a first-person shooter. When you emote, the camera transfers in third person. So you can see yourself looking cool. So think about that. It's not about checking all the boxes, but think about what's going to be meaningful for your game and how it can interact with the other elements. Okay, like an RPG is really powerful because you can choose your class. You have autonomy. But then it's part of your team, so you have relatedness. And when you're the healer, you need to have information on your HUD so that you can heal really fast other players, and then the players can see how competent you are and say, yeah, thank you for resurrecting you, stuff like that. So think about what's going to be important for players in different roles to be competent. And I know it's hard, it's a lot of information to remember, but always keep in mind that what's going to be meaningful for players. This is how we taught players in the PvE part of Fortnite how to build. We placed them in a situation where it's meaningful to learn how to build. They're stuck in a cave. They need to get out, so they need to learn how to build a stair. And of course, there's a chest there. On top of that, you have extrinsic motivation. So that's really, really important. Last part, I'm going to go very fast because we don't have a lot of time left, is about the scientific method. Like I said, we are biased. So first of all, our brains are limited, but we are plagued with cognitive and social biases, called unconscious biases. You've heard of that? You, as the maker of your game, you're not the best person to analyze what's good or not good in your game because you know it too well. It's called the curse of knowledge. So that's why we playtest, and we need to playtest in a way that we use a scientific method as much as we can. The scientific method, science is all about limiting as much as possible human biases. So that's why we standardize protocols and all that. So doing playtest is good, but you have to make sure it's using the scientific method and it's standardized and you limit biases as much as possible. So that's why we separate players from the game developers that are in the secret room watching, and the secret room is soundproofed, so the players can't hear them. It's important also when you do playtest to not just, let's playtest just to see what happens. You need to have hypotheses. This is when you do science, you usually have an hypothesis. And you put together an experimental protocol to test your hypothesis and to then act on it. So this is what we did in Fortnite. We worked a lot on the production pipeline to integrate user research in there. So I don't have the time to explain all that, but it's really important not just test to test, but to think about the questions that you can verify at the stage that you are in the development of your game. And think that you don't have to wait until it's implemented to test. It's actually a bad idea to do that, because once it's implemented, it's already very late and costly to change things. So as soon as you have paper prototypes, test them. You can test a system with paper and cards and dice. You can test icons like on paper. Quick and dirty is good because then you can immediately see if there's a problem and change it. Well, it's super cheap to change it. If you wait until it's implemented, or worse, art it up, and there's a problem, it's super costly to change anything. And you're attached to it now. It's your baby, so it's hard. And when you find a problem, the thing is not, solving problems is easy. We do that all the time, but solving the right problem is what's hard. So in Fortnite, we were in online tests very early on. So we had alpha testers. It was not even beta. It was not really even alpha because not all the systems were there. But regularly, we sent surveys to see what was going on. And at some point, players were saying, the game is too grindy. So now we have a problem. Feels grindy. The game feels grindy. Okay, why? Is this coming from the game design? Well, as a system designer, can you check your math? Is there something maybe off at some point? Maybe when players are level 10, they feel that it's getting way too long to harvest stuff to be able to craft the weapon that works well with level 10. So system designer, check, like, nope, my math is sound. All right, so assuming is right. Why do we have that problem? And remember, perception is subjective. Doesn't matter what your game is in reality. What matters is how people perceive it. So this is the reason why we also ask players, perception questions. How do you perceive about when you were getting loots? Were you excited? Do you feel that it was more important when you play with someone else? Blah, 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 blah. So we want to make sure there's no mismatch between the design and the perception of it. And so in Fortnite, after the system designer told me, no, it's working well, my math is good. I'm like, okay, so why do players really feel that it's more grindy in Fortnite than other games? So this is when you start to look at how things look like. Maybe there's some bad form follows function, it's not working well. So we had many hypotheses, I'm just gonna show you one. In Fortnite, when you start to destroy something, you have a weak point appearing. It's supposed to tell you where to aim so that you can harvest that object faster. The whole system design of harvesting is based off players using the weak point. The problem is that this is what we're observing in playtest. Players were completely ignoring that weak point. So because I thought, we have change blindness and attentional blindness, we don't pay attention to things, maybe it's not standing out enough for them to really see it. And when I was asking in surveys, what is this? They were answering surveys on computers, because if you interview people, this is introducing biases. They were answering to me like, I don't know. So I thought, okay, it's probably because in attentional blindness, they're doing something, they're focusing on destroying that thing, they don't see that weak point. Okay, let's iterate on it. Change it in the UI. So the artist made it bigger, blue, it's the color of take in Fortnite, so it's standing out more, it's pulsing inward. All right, this should work. Let's take a look at the playtest. And I come the hell! This is why the secret rooms in playtest rooms are soundproofed, because we get annoyed, like, why can't they see it? And again, for us, it's obvious because we understand what this does, but not for players who don't know anything about that. So when I was asking players at that stage, what is this? They were answering, oh, that's the little thing that's telling me I'm targeting that object. And like, okay, so now they see it, but we don't have a good form follows function. They don't understand what it's for. So we need to keep working on it. So the game designers thought about this and like, how about we don't have it at the beginning? So if you think about PvE, we don't have it at the beginning of the game, and we're going to put that weak point ability in the skill tree. So now there's more fanfare around it. You have to unlock it, you earn it. We put a lot of text hoping that people read. They don't read, but we always think, oh yeah, they're totally going to read that thing. So this is how it looked like. So you have new quest, but at least they encounter way more about that. And there's a video showing them the point. Of course, it goes too fast for them to read, so they don't read. But after we did that, it became, so they did not just fix it in the UI, they rethought the whole thing. And now it's a reward that has a meaning for players. And after we did that, we saw much more people doing that. And it's also why it sounds good, because like, yeah, it's working finally, yeah. We didn't reach 100%. It's really rare or you can fix a problem entirely, but it made a huge difference. And you might think, why spend so much time on fixing that tiny thing in the design? It's small comparatively. The designers wanted to keep it. You could have decided, let's remove it and redo the system design without. But it's good for game feel because now it's a game within the game. So it's not for me to decide what is the intention behind the design, but if this is your intention, if this is where you want to put some challenge, then you have to make sure it's but huge impact. Had a huge impact on the on the perception of the game because it had ripple effects on how people harvested and felt, the grindiness. So of course, if we don't fix it, it's a problem. All right, so that's it. These are the ingredients. Use them. It can guide you. You're not going to remember them. It's okay. But at least if you have them in front of you, you can make sure, hey, maybe in my design there's something missing that's going to make the game less engaging than it should be. Or maybe everything is there, but people don't understand it, so you have a usability problem. But at least you know where to start, and gives you some guidelines. There's no recipe, just no one recipe to make a successful game, but these are the ingredients that you can play around with to make up your own recipe. That's it for me. So you'll find on my blog, there's a lot of resources, a lot of books. The Game Feel book is in there. You have a lot of books in there. Also, online resources are in there around the Game UX community. And I have a book. Hopefully, the school is going to have it.
We ordered a copy. It's on the way.
Awesome. So you're going to be able to have the book here and consult it. I also the chair of the Game UX Summit that we've been doing since 2016. So we did it at Epic first, and then it became its own independent thing that a different studio hosted every year. So after Epic, it was Ubisoft Toronto. After that, it was EA Vancouver, and this year it was in France. You have a lot of videos, and it's not just about UI, it's UX covering all the things. And it's always about case studies, so I really recommend it. The ones from this year, Game UX Summit, is going to probably be live next week. And there's a Genova Chen and Kate Edwards that did a keynote session there. There's a lot of really cool things. So it's going to be on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your attention, and now I'm going to take some questions.
All right, as Celia said, we'll start Q&A right now. We want to mic every question that's asked so that all of you can hear it and everyone on the stream too. So that said, as Celia is responding to a question, if you yourself want to ask something, just raise your hand during her response so we can get to you and get a mic to you. So having said that, let's kick it off. All right, we've got a question right here.
How do we understand at what point a UI is interfering with the user experience?
It depends on what you're talking about. Like the example of the spike trap that I showed you was very early. Very early, as soon as your UI designers are working on the symbols they're going to use to represent things, this is when you can test the symbols. You don't have to wait until it's arted up and looking all awesome to test it. You have to test first if the symbol is working. So that's a very good example. The symbol of, the abstract representation of the basic spike trap didn't work. So this is when you can think about, all right, this symbol doesn't work. Let's try another symbol. So very early, you can do that. And do it with the symbols that are really critical to your game. If you have an RPG, of course you have like hundreds of icons. You're not going to be able to test them all. Test those who are really common to everyone or really important to all the different classes.
Next question is over there.
Hi. Are there any mistakes that you see repeated over and over that are really simple to fix?
Yes. In the usability comment, I see these mistakes all the time. So signs and feedback that are not here or they're not clear. Like look at any game that has a skill tree. When you have a skill tree, you need to convey at least 4 states for the skills. The skill is locked. The skill is unlocked, but you don't have enough points to buy it. The skill is, you can buy it, and you have it. It's pretty rare when I see a game where these states are clear, usability-wise. And that's like a baseline of stuff. The HUD that's not enough information or icons that are not clear. or the onboarding that's too many things, or it's hand-holding too much. Because the onboarding is important to do it, but a lot of games, especially mobile games, they have a tendency to just say, all right, click here, and now do that, and now do this. And people are just following the instructions. They don't learn why they're doing these things. And so the learning is shallow. So it's not doing the thing that it's supposed to be doing. So I see that a lot in games. So basically, all the information I put in there, that's really where I saw the problems over and over and over and over again. So if you fix that, you should be have a good, a good head start.
Next question. Not all at once. Here we go.
So the first year students are about to take their games to get play tests for the very first time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any suggestions on how to make sure, how to pick up on user experience feedback from testers when you don't necessarily have the separated room and everything? We're just going to be standing there with them. Is there anything that is super helpful to be looking for specifically?
Yeah. Yes. So there's many things that can go wrong when you do that. So you have to be very, very careful. First of all, if you're not a researcher, you don't know how to conduct tests, don't interview people. Prepare a survey, let them play, or think about tasks, and prepare a survey about what you're going to ask them on the computer. Like SurveyMonkey or in Google Forms, you can do basic stuff. So it's going to be way easier than just asking them, because when you see the person in front of you, it's changing things. So be careful with that. Think about your hypothesis first. Are you going to test the whole game? Are people engaged with the game? Or are you testing, can people use the crafting system? Do they know if they want to craft something? Do they know how to find the recipe and craft it? So if you want to get that sort of questions answered, you can think about a very specific protocol. You're going to show them the interface. It could be even a clickable prototype, and ask them, all right, and for everyone, you write down the question, so you don't you don't improvise, and you ask them, I'm asking you to find the exterminator in your inventory and to craft it. And you just watch what people do, how many mistakes they do, and how long does it take them. Because eventually they're going to manage to do it. It's not necessarily what we're looking for. We're looking for, it's really too long to get there. So always think about the questions you're going to ask, and try to get very objective answers. If you play test with 5 people, it doesn't mean anything to ask them, did you like it? Did you find it fun? We don't care. The sample is too small to get anything around opinions. Ask objective questions. What was this? What was that? What was your objective here? Don't ask, did you find the UI usable? People are going to say yes. So make sure you get the information that you need. Standardize as much as possible, and try to remove the human interactions as much as possible. And then make sure you're not standing right them, like this, oh yeah, oh, and try to not, say anything. Just let them play. You can say, ask me questions if you want, but I'm not going to answer questions. And if you see them struggle, write down the struggle for this, but give them the answer. You don't want them to spend 10 minutes struggling when you have 10 more minutes to test. So make sure you let them try to figure it out. Write down, they struggled here, so we need to fix that. But then give them the key to move on, because otherwise you're just going to have 10 people that struggle at this point. Does that make sense? Is it? Okay.
In the middle?
So I learned in, say, psychology and stuff that you're more likely to remember things when it's more pertinent to your survival.
What is pertinent to your survival today?
Yeah. I was just wondering if anything like that is ever used in some sort of aspect when it comes to UX or design in that way, like the HUD and everything else, just to help a player remember better that they can use this and that.
Okay, so yes and no. Yes, but it's very nuanced, because like I said, the brain is not pre-wired. So yes, we have some intuitions and stuff that guides us as like biology, but a lot of it we learn through our environment. So if you did not survive in the jungle, these things are not going to help you. You're going to be wired differently as if you survived university, for example. But we do use emotions. So, for example, when you have fear, some theorists say that fear, let's say you see a predator or someone can be dangerous on the streets, and you run away, and you're going to feel fear. A lot of theories say that feeling of fear is a reward for you to have done the right thing because you ran away. That's why your heart was beating, and you interpreted it as fear. So a lot of theories say that motivation, behavior comes first, and then emotion rewards you from doing the thing that got you to survive. And so we are wired for that to seek pleasure, like food, it's pleasurable, like mating is pleasurable because we need to reproduce to save the species. So these things are usually going to be pleasurable. We're going to try to reproduce that. And we avoid pain, getting hurt. We try to avoid that. So the problem is that we use symbols in games. So if you see, like in Mario, the big boulder with the sharp teeth, that's a signal that we've seen because wolves or even dogs, maybe you got bit when you were a kid. It's a symbol that we really have integrated as dangerous. So there's a little part of nature, but there's a lot of part of culture, what you integrated as being dangerous, and we can use these to make better form false function, like using red to say you're getting hurt. So yes, so culture comes in, like in China, red has a lot of other meanings, but we still, like all of us, bleed blood. That's red. So it's still good information to say you're bleeding. So it's things like that we can use, but we have to be careful. There are things that are working in some cultures, and others that's not, like the a bulb, the light bulb for idea, doesn't work in all cultures. There's many symbols like that, and sometimes some symbols don't work across generations, like the floppy disk to save. To my generation, it means something because I use these things. To you, less so. You had to learn about it. Now you know about it, but you had to learn about it. For us, I didn't have to learn about it because I used it. So to me, that was a very good form of false function. But to you, you had to learn it. So yes, in the sense that we can use all these emotion and survival information, and know in the sense that it's going to be different depending on the culture, generation, et cetera, et cetera. It was a long answer, brother.
All right, everyone. Any other questions? I think we're going to take some time to wrap up here. Let's give a big thanks to our guest, Celia Hodent.
Thank you.
As mentioned, if you want to introduce yourself, she'll be here for the next few moments. Feel free. If you don't mind just picking up your trash remainings, and that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.